What I'd like to do this afternoon before we go to this afternoon's topic is start with a short meditation. And yesterday in our Vipassana practice, the recommendation was to start by looking for me, the person, me, the meditator. And so that's what we did yesterday. But as I briefly mentioned this morning, particularly in the Kagyu and Nyingma schools of Tibetan Buddhism, the practice Mahamudra and Dzogchen, when it comes to Vipassana practice, the recommendation there is to start by investigating the mind itself, the mind directly. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to do a Vipassana practice based on the mind. So we're going to start by doing some Shamatha practice, the Shamatha practice of resting in awareness for a few minutes, and then we'll move from there into Vipassana by doing some investigation on the mind itself. So we'll do a 15-minute practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. And allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And then simply releasing all appearances, allowing the mind to come to rest. Resting in awareness itself. Simply knowing that you're aware. If you get caught up in any agitation, tension or distraction, lower the gaze, release the awareness into space, releasing all appearances and relaxing completely. And simply resting in the stillness of awareness. The awareness that you're resting in, does it have a location? Is it located somewhere? Don't try to intellectually answer this. Just look. Is awareness inside the body? is awareness inside the head. Is awareness outside the body. How big is awareness? Is it very small or is it very large? Is there an edge or limit, physical limit to awareness? Does it have a border? Is there anything outside of awareness? And then release all investigation and allow the mind to come to rest. Resting in awareness. So we can see that the approach in this Vipassana practice with respect to the mind is a little bit different than we did in the looking for the person. And we'll do one or two more of these sorts of Vipassana practices in the coming days, in the coming 2 days. Any questions for the discussion group anyone would like to bring up before we go to this afternoon's topic?
Well, the first one, can we engage in learning practices without believing in the group? The group was a bit divided.
Mm-hmm. So what did you think?
I think you can.
You can?
You can.
You can. And why did you think that?
Because it said that you don't necessarily have to believe at first many things, and you can explore yourself and find out if it's the case. Or
I think that's probably true. I mean, some of what we saw in the Lam Rim, some of the early points were like reflecting on precious human life. I think we can do that without rebirth. Death, definitely. No. And then what sort of suffering we can expect in future, we can reflect on that. And to reflect on the fact that we're stuck in this unsatisfactory state called dukkha with mental afflictions. I think this is all certainly possible. So I think that certainly the foundation practices we definitely can. I mean, when we go to some of the more high level like bodhicitta, that might be a bit difficult because, you know, we're talking about achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all, but if we only believe in this life, that would be a bit difficult, I think. But certainly an emptiness, of course, we can, and impermanence, I mean, a lot of these practices we can certainly practice, and shamatha, of course, I mean, calm, clear, focused mind. And of course, the session is that if we really practice these, particularly the shamatha practice and the vipassana practice, that as we purify our mind, then these sorts of things become more and more obvious, more and more clear to us. And the reason I sort of ask that question is that sometimes what people do is they look at all these Buddhist things, and if they find one or two things that they either don't agree with or can't prove, they go, oh, well, this Buddhist stuff is wrong, and throw it all out. And I think that would be a very big shame. And as Dalai Lama often says, you know, when he's talking to public, the general public, he often says, please do not convert to Buddhism. Because he says if you grew up in a tradition that works for you and you try to convert, you'll get confused and then you may have difficulties in the culture and family that you live in. And he says, rather, if there's anything here that can help you to be a better Christian, a better atheist, a better whatever, then use it. And he says if you didn't grow up in a tradition, or the one you grew up in is not really helping you, and you find that this Buddhist approach is very helpful, then eventually you can think about becoming a Buddhist. But again, it's not really so much what we call ourselves as what we do with our life. Any other questions? Yeah.
So why couldn't you follow the Bodhicitta if you don't really believe it? Can you not just look for moral faith because you like it?
I mean, you can certainly develop great compassion, but bodhicitta is saying, I'm going to achieve enlightenment so that I can help to liberate everyone from suffering. I mean, the idea of actually achieving enlightenment in this very life is already challenging, but then to be able to help liberate everyone else from suffering, I mean, everyone, if we've only got a short life, I mean, that might be difficult to do, you know, because we've only got very short time to do that. But certainly the preceding step of having great compassion and doing whatever we can to help everyone overcome suffering, that for sure. But that bodhicitta, I think that next level logically would be a little bit difficult to get to that level.
Is everybody born with ego and attachment, or does it depend on the rebirth?
Well, of course, we talk about this continuum of mind, and everything we do in this life carries forward. And so we have a lot of imprints for all sorts of stuff, and of course grasping, attachment, jealousy, it's all there when we move into the next life. But then of course it depends on how we grew up, what sort of environment, whether those imprints strengthen or we reduce them. But they're there.
If someone's in Australia and someone's in Germany and they have sort of like a mental connection, like something happens to someone and the other person feels that, is that like an overlapping of minds or what?
No, it just means that there is, we talk about interdependency, and that just means that we have a very subtle connection at the mental level. It's not like overlapping. Not so long, that's good.
One of the questions that came up when we were talking about rebirth was what happens to mind when someone has a mental illness like Alzheimer's or dementia?
Yeah. Well, of course, at the end of this life, that's finished because that's on the basis of this brain. So it's not like they would be born with Alzheimer's again in the next life. And of course, then while they have that, they have very limited capacity of doing anything. So when that finishes, then they move on to the next life and then start afresh.
And for example, for the teacher question, in that case that you're saying that you only lived your own career and you want to adopt some Buddhist perspective for improving your life, would you need a teacher in that case?
Well, again, it really depends on what you want to do in your life. And it really depends what sort of framework you're going to be using. And you may find that it's sufficient just to pick up some of these ideas and use them in whatever framework you have. But also, of course, like everything in our life, if we want to become the master of anything, then often it's good to have a teacher, whether it's sport or music or some technical skill or something, to save us time. So yeah, I think it can be very helpful if we want to even adopt some of these ideas, that if we can help someone to help us to implement them more effectively. I mean, if we had unlimited time, then there could be an argument, well, I don't need a teacher, I just keep chipping away and eventually I'll get there. But of course we don't have unlimited time, and so we want to make whatever time we have available as most effective as possible. And so a teacher can help save a lot of time.
I still have some problems with the idea of karma regarding people in very horrible situations. Is it really saying that people who are suffering quite horrible situations
No, this is cognitive fusion. So, and of course also we have to understand the principle of emptiness and the principle of continuity of consciousness. So often people mistakenly use karma as a blame game, or they must have been bad so they deserve to suffer. That's cognitive fusion, rather than the response should be compassion. And of course remember there's causes and conditions. So if we find ourselves in conditions where suffering arises, we'll probably suffer. Does that mean we're bad? No. It just means causality has happened and we end up in that situation. And of course, often people say, I must have been bad in my past life, but you didn't exist in your past life. So then people beat themselves up. So again, to really answer these questions, we have to really understand this view of emptiness that we looked at yesterday. Otherwise we come up with some very strange ideas.
I'll just read a line from a book by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, and then my question will follow. To embark on the path which leads to liberation and enlightenment, we must isolate our bodies from physical busyness and our minds from busy thoughts. This intuitively seems contradictory to when you said when you find a great teacher, they'll be zipping around the world, dispensing knowledge or helping people.
Right.
Which is sort of in contradiction to what he's saying.
Right. So what he's saying is that if we want to start to do something, we need some good conditions. If we're running around like crazy all the time, as a beginner, we're not going to start anywhere. But as we progress in the path, what's conducive changes. So I think I mentioned earlier, for us as beginners, what's conducive is a quiet place, friendly people, no noise, all of these things. Because otherwise we just get swept away.
Yeah.
But actually as we progress on the path, what's conducive changes. Particularly in high-level teacher, what's conducive is that they need to find these difficult situations, people testing them to go further, but we don't need that as a beginner. That's why we as a beginner need to step back and have friendly people, quiet place, otherwise we wouldn't be able to begin anything.
Right.
So what is said about the influences around you, or I don't exactly know what is said, but the 5 people you circle yourself with the most affect you the most. So what is kind of said about that?
Yeah, that's the idea of sangha. So we briefly mentioned this morning, and I'll talk more about that on the last morning. As a beginner, this is not only helpful, I would say for most of us, absolutely necessary.
To have these people around you?
Yes, because the reality is that when we go home, even if we want to meditate and change and so forth, we've got very strong habits and we're not very well disciplined, and so we're easily affected by things, our habits and the people around us. And so what will probably happen for most people when they go home is they go back in their familiar environment, off they go. Even if and that was my experience. When I did this and a few other courses, I went back to Australia and I was very enthusiastic about changing my life, meditating every day. But where I went back to, there was none of these people, there was no centre, no one interested. And even though I wanted to meditate and change, for 2 years, nothing happened. Nothing. I just got swept up in my old habits. It was only when I pulled myself out of that and found myself in an environment where I had supportive people. In my case, I went to study, but I'm not suggesting you have to do that, in a Buddhist place. Then I started to actually be able to do something, meditate and change and so forth.
So you changed your environment and kind of took yourself away
Yeah.
from that?
I mean, but we're talking 25 years ago. Now, in most environments, there are these sorts of like-minded people, and this is something we really need to address. If we really want to start to do something, we need to find these people. If we try and do it on our own, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, because we can't go against all the things that are pushing us in the other way. If we get some help and we help others, then we can start to do something.
So ultimately, though, it is okay to kind of take yourself away to get a ground level and then put yourself back in to try to help.
Yeah, so as based on this question here, what he was reading is that initially we need to step back from all those influences that sweep us away and then have a few people around us who can support us so we can start to do something and develop the mind, and then we can go back into those situations. In fact, at a higher level, we'll need to go back there to go further, to challenge us. But as a beginner, we don't need that.
In our group, we got to the idea that we know less than the first day in many things.
Very good.
We
Excellent.
knew you were going to say.
Excellent.
Yeah, okay. So we thought, like, you know, when you're meditating and thoughts and images and like another voice in your head telling you you're not going to be able to concentrate or whatever. So this voice or this thing, is this the mind, is this the ego, or is this I that we are not able to find?
All of those. I mean, it's just another appearance in the mind. It's just another thought. And of course, when that happens, then just watch that. Watch it. Don't get caught up in it. Don't try and get rid of it. You don't fight with it, but don't follow it. Just watch it. And if you watch it, it's just blah blah blah. It can't do anything.
Okay, but what is it?
What is it? It's just a thought. It's just commentary coming up in your mind.
It's not
Who created the commentary? You did. Your mind did.
Who you?
There's only
Who
one
are you
you.
talking to? Me? The I, the mind, the ego? I mean,
The horse.
the horse.
The horse. No, you. Again, I mean, like for example, if I walk out this room, I mean, what's walking out the room is the body, isn't it? But we can say, I'm walking out the room on the basis of the body. So if a thought arises, you can say, I'm thinking, but actually what's happening is a thought is arising in the mind. So the mind is producing the thought, or you can say, I'm producing the thoughts. Both the same. Sorry. Last question, then we need to go to this afternoon's topic, yeah.
Really quick one. What is Vajrasattva?
Vajrasattva, I mentioned in the Vajrayana or Tantra vehicle, we do all the practices from the enlightened state, and it said we arise as what's called a deity. And a deity is a particular enlightened form, and I mentioned a couple of names like Tara, Chenrezig, Manjushri. One of those is Vajrasattva, and each one has a particular aspect. And Vajrasattva has the aspect of purification. So Vajrasattva is usually white in colour. And that practice you did with Felipe the other night, the purification one, the four opponent powers, in Tibetan Buddhism, that's often packaged in terms of this Vajrasattva practice as a purification practice. Okay, let's go to this afternoon's topic. So the first evening I mentioned brief overview of this, what's called Shamatha practice. So I'd like to go a little bit more into that topic now. So remember, shamatha is a Sanskrit word. Shama means calm, and tat means abiding. So we're talking about not only a calm mind, but a mind that is abiding, i.e. single-pointedly focused on an object. So we're talking about here of cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind. So of course we're talking about the concentration or samadhi practice. And here in the Mahayana traditions, this concentration practice is often called shamatha practice because that's a particular level of concentration we're trying to cultivate. In the Theravada Buddhist traditions, when they talk about this concentration practice, usually you'll hear the word jhana. We're doing jhana practice. It's the same practice. Jhana is just another different level of concentration. And as we saw in all Buddhist traditions, this is one of the three core areas of practice. So the basis, of course, is ethics. On that basis, we engage in concentration practice. And then on that basis, we engage in the wisdom of Vipassana practice. So Shamatha is the basis of Vipassana. So if we want to come to a direct insight into the nature of reality, to come to directly realize that, we need this shamatha. If we don't have that, if our concentration is less than that, at best in our Vipassana practice, we could have a taste or experience that could have a very strong effect on our mind, but it'll slowly wear off. If we really want to have an insight, direct insight that's stable and continuous, then we need this shamatha. But of course, shamatha, this practice, also brings enormous direct benefit to us in our life. Because we're talking about developing our attention skills. And so if we improve our attention skills, then of course we're going to be more effective in everything we do in our life. Because we'll be more focused. And therefore, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance, and you'll find the mental afflictions will be less. In fact, that great Indian master Shantideva in the 8th century, he said, "Those with a distracted mind live in the jaws of the mental afflictions." Meaning if our mind is distracted, we are more predisposed to mental afflictions like anger, jealousy, craving, and so forth. So you'll find if you do this practice and you calm down your mind and it's more focused, you'll find it's harder for the mental afflictions to come up. But also, as we saw earlier, if we simply do the shamatha practice, we're also going to find that we'll start to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. I use that example of me being in retreat. That through the mind calming down, again from Shantideva, the craving and attachment will subside, which means actually we're going to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. So these are some of the immediate benefits of this practice. But of course, from a Buddhist perspective, the main reason we're doing this practice is as a basis for Vipassana, so we can cut through ignorance, mental afflictions and suffering. How do we train in it? We briefly looked at that on the first evening. So we saw there that in terms of any practice, there's always two parts. Meditation and what we do for the rest of the day. Because sometimes I hear people talking and one person will say to the other, "When do you do your practice?" And the other person says, "Oh, I do it every morning at 6:30 for half an hour." If this is our idea of practice, we're not going to get very far. Because even if we diligently meditate every day, even maybe an hour, but then we jump up and run around like crazy for 14 hours, which one of those is going to win out? So if we want any practice to progress, of course we need a daily meditation practice to internalize, but then we also need to integrate that into our daily life. If we do those two things together, we will progress. And what we can do to integrate into daily life, I'm going to talk a little bit more about. That's going to be the main topic for the last morning of this course. In terms of meditation, we saw on the first evening, all meditations have two parts, preparation and the actual meditation. And we should not cut short the preparation. Sometimes people just sit down and start doing the actual meditation and they wonder why it's not going very well. So what we saw there is, of course, we need to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of meditation, making sure we have a proper, good posture. The body is relaxed. The breathing is flowing naturally. The mind is coming into the present moment. We have a good motivation. These are all important. If we don't do these things or cut them short, you're going to find the actual practice is not going to work very well. And then here in the actual practice of shamatha, We looked at a couple of things on the first evening. The first thing was qualities. What qualities are we cultivating in this practice? And we mentioned that normally in the meditation texts, two qualities are mentioned. That we need to cultivate stability, or in other words, a stable mind to be able to focus on an object without becoming distracted. But also we want to be able to focus on that object in a very clear way, so clarity, to overcome dullness. But on that first night we added a third quality that normally you won't see in the meditation text. And that is the quality of relaxation. Because the reality is, for most of us in the modern world, we lead very hectic, fast-paced lives, constantly bombarded by stimulus. Our minds tend to be very chaotic. And whenever we focus on anything, we tense. That's our natural habit, to tense when we focus. And unfortunately, that works a little bit. But we know from our own experience, if we focus on something with a lot of tension for a longer period, we become completely exhausted and we often become very agitated. So it's not a sustainable method of focus. So therefore, if we want to have a sustainable method of focus, the first quality we need to cultivate is relaxation. And I think this is why, probably one of the main reasons we have difficulties in meditation as a beginner. We're simply too tight, we're too tense, we're simply trying too hard. And then problems arise and we think the reason I got distracted is I didn't clamp down hard enough, so we clamp down even harder. And that just makes even more problems. And then people get headaches from meditating and they say, I can't meditate. And to really highlight the importance of this basis in relaxation, I'd like to read from this book, Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace. It's the book I recommend for Shamatha practice.
What's the name?
Attention Revolution. And this on page 14, he says the following. Thus, our practice of mindfulness of breathing, so he's talking about Shamatha practice observing the breath, consists of prolonging our awareness of our breath. While this requires an alert mind, such concentration should not be tense, but rather balanced. When we discover that we've become distracted from the meditation object, it may feel natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of shamatha, you'll need an alternative. I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. In fact, this was about, I think, 1980. He was meditating here above Dharamkot. There's a little ridge above Dharamkot. There's a few meditators' huts there. That's where he was meditating. I had no financial worries and my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on Shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in the practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives. Their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media, and noise. Years of such existence conditioned the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan doctor whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, "From the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders. But given how ill you are coping remarkably well." Whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin, or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax. And I can't overemphasize this enough, based on my own experience and talking to many, many people. Relax, relax, relax. If we don't have a relaxed body and mind, that none of the practices is going to be sustainable. This is the basis. So sometimes here, these three qualities, we use the analogy of a tree. That first we need to sink deep roots of relaxation to be able to support the trunk of stability. The stronger the trunk of stability, the higher the branches and leaves of clarity can grow. If you don't sink those deep roots of relaxation, your tree of shamatha will just completely fall over. Then we looked the first evening about objects. What object should we use in this practice? And so in this course, we've introduced three objects: the breath, the mind, and awareness. And each one of those three, I think, has its own unique benefits for us in the modern world. And the general recommendation, of course, is use the object that works best for you. So basically, find an object that you resonate with and then use that object. If from one day to the next or 1 week from the next you keep changing, one day the breath, next the mind, next awareness, third image, if you keep changing, you won't really go very far in this practice. So you can experiment, of course, as a beginner for some time to see which one works best for you, and then find an object that works and then really go with that object. If you want to, say, use the mind or rest in awareness, but you find it difficult to get into that practice, then what you could do is use the breath for some time, and I mean weeks or months or longer, till your mind becomes more relaxed, more clear and focused. And then when the mind is more stable, then you can switch to using the mind or resting in awareness. So that is okay. But if you keep changing every day or week, backwards and forwards, then that's not really going to work. As part of the criteria for picking the object, we need to be enthusiastic. For example, many people find the breath practice the easiest, but often people find it quite boring. So if we are not enthusiastic about that object, we're not going to get anywhere. So if we're much more enthusiastic about the mind and awareness, then maybe that's a better object to use than the breath, if we're not really enthusiastic about the breath. So we either get enthusiastic or we find another object. Question?
You said before, or just then, that you can use visual things as well.
A visual object, yeah.
Visual object. So that is something that we can and is...
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
As I mentioned in the Lam Rim this morning, in the Geluk school, when they come to explaining Shamatha practice, the one that's often taught is a mental image of a Buddha. But many people find that extremely difficult because it's a complex object and we're not really familiar with that, and many of us are not very good at visualization. But some people are very much drawn to visualization, you know, architects and designers and so forth. So if you really resonate, you really find visualization very good, easy, then that may be your best object. And pick a visual object. A visual, not a visual with the eye, but a visualized image. Yeah.
Somewhere I was reading, one should be penetrative with his practice while meditating. Is it
We're supposed to be what? Sorry, I didn't catch.
penetrating while you are practicing meditation.
Penetrating?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Like,
Focused?
yes,
Yeah, of course, that's the second one, stability.
so, how will I know I'm not forcing, just focusing? It is
Because that's why we need relaxation as basis. If you notice any tension in the body or mind, even if you're very stable and clear, you need to release that tension. Release, release, release. So we're not trying to develop stability and clarity at the cost of relaxation. That's not sustainable. We need to cultivate these in this order.
Is breath an object or is part of relaxation?
So the sensations of the breath is the object. It's the object that is most widely recommended in most Buddhist traditions.
Okay.
And in this course, we've done a couple of options. The rhythm, the abdomen, and the nostrils.
Good, thank you.
We say here that mind and awareness is the same thing. So I still don't understand the difference between these two.
So in the shamatha practice of observing the mind, what we're doing is we're observing the contents, what's coming up. In the awareness practice, we're not interested in any contents. We're just resting in knowing. That's all.
So, on that question, is that a Gelug school?
No, that's actually not Gelog. It's Kagyu. It's Mahamudra and Dzogchen approach. Is to do the.
Different than awareness.
Well, they're not. The only difference is in one it's the same thing, but in one we're observing appearances, in the other one we're not interested in appearances.
Yeah, but doesn't that separate the mind into two different things?
No, it just means we're looking at one aspect of the mind. In the mind practice, we're looking at what's appearing in the mind, and in the awareness practice, we're looking at the mind itself. But of course, appearances only occur in the mind.
Right, but if you're using the word mind to describe appearances...
No. Appearances appear in the mind.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So in the shamatha practice, when you say mind, you're saying the appearances
Well, it's
that
also
are arising in the mind.
well, it's the space of the mind
Okay.
plus whatever appears in that space.
And the awareness is the mind itself.
It's just the space. We're just looking at that. We're just staying there.
until we relax ourselves.
Sorry, that didn't catch.
Relax.
Relax, yeah.
Yes, we talk about relaxation.
Right.
But what can we do this?
What or how?
How?
How can we do this? By what we did at the start of a meditation. Sit down, have a good posture, and then on any tension in the body, on every out-breath, release, 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 release. And then if you notice any tension in the mind, on the out-breath, you release, release, release. So the out-breath is always a very good opportunity to release any tension in the body or the mind.
But we speak also to do this meditation every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to talk about that on the last morning of the course. How to set up the day for this. Yeah.
I usually face difficulties with partially open eyes, like all the muscles are contracting here. So what is the best? Should we always follow the partially closed eyes or what?
No, I mean, I don't. I prefer just natural open. I find partial also not so comfortable, so I just have naturally open. And when we're at home, what can be good if we're meditating with the eyes open is just have like a blank wall in front of us, so there's nothing for the visual gaze to latch onto. What you don't want, if you're meditating with the eyes open, what you don't want is like a candle flickering or some movement, because that'll just pull your attention. So best is have a blank wall, and personally, I like to meditate, because I'm a sort of person who gets more agitated than dull, so actually I like to meditate in a completely dark room. Because then there's nothing for the visual gaze to lock onto. But if we're a sort of person that naturally tends to be more dull than agitated, maybe a dark room is not a good idea. We'll just go very sleepy. So we have to see what sort of person we are. We more get agitated or dull. And if you get more agitated, then try dark. If you get more dull, then have more light where you meditate.
I think he was good.
A lot of us are going to go back to lives with 9 to 12 hours of work a day.
9 to 5?
9 to 12 hours of work a day.
Oh.
How do you recommend integrating the practice?
And so, and this is something I'm going to talk a little bit about on the last morning, but I mean, often people say, oh, I'd like to meditate, but I don't have time. I mean, that's never a valid excuse. Never. Now, of course, the reality is probably most of us have very busy days, and probably we don't have enough time to do everything. Probably true. And some things we do every day are essential. Most of us need to work a certain number of hours to get enough income, and so maybe some of us got family responsibilities and other responsibilities. But above and beyond these essential responsibilities, we often fill up our day with lots of stuff. And we often do that for one of two reasons. One is that in our modern society it's felt like if you're not doing something, you're not being productive. So do something, just do anything. And if we're not doing anything, we're sitting there quietly, not doing anything, it sort of forces us to look at the state of our mind, which is a mess. So we just busy ourselves to distract ourselves to avoid looking at our chaotic mind. So we just fill up our day with lots of stuff. So, of course, what we could do is try to forcibly cut things out of our life to free up time, but that's not going to work, I think. Rather, what we should do is what was recommended in the Lam Rim at the beginning, is reflect on precious human life and death. If we reflect on these two things, we're going to understand we've got a precious opportunity, it's not going to last forever, let's make our life meaningful. And if you really have that aspiration, then you'll look at all the things you do in your day and you'll go, this is not bringing me anything, this is not bringing me anything, and we'll lose interest. And I'm doing 12 hours a day work, and just that's not what I want to do with my life. And then we'll either cut down that or we'll find another job that doesn't demand 12 hours a day. Because I suggest if we're doing that, there's no way we're going to have time or energy for anything else. I mean, if that's what we want to do with our life, if we want to spend all of our life doing a job, fine. But, and as I'm going to talk about in the last morning, there was a nurse who worked in the hospice movement for 30 years. She was an Australian nurse, caring for the dying people. And over that time, she asked about people's regrets. What are their biggest regrets in life? And by far, one of the biggest regrets was regretting working too hard in their life and not dedicating their life to other meaningful things, to family and other more meaningful things. In fact, she said every single male patient had this regret, working too hard.
There is a formal study about this as well. And there's a TED talk about that study.
Mm.
They've observed people over, I think, 70 years. It's the longest study in history, which is still going on. There's a TED talk about it, which arrives at the same conclusion.
So basically, if we do this reflection on precious human life and death, and then we really see, I want to make my life meaningful, then I think what you'll find is that suddenly you're going to have a lot of time and energy to meditate and to develop yourself. But I suggest if you're just trying to keep a 12-hour work day plus all these other things and add meditation, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work.
So, an extension to the same question. If you're in a profession which allows you to be in a state of flow more often, let's say a painter or a musician or a dancer or whatever.
Well, if we dedicate time to meditation, the Shamatha practice, we can be in the flow in any job. And then we're going to be much more effective. I saw just recently, was it Microsoft in Japan? They made it a 4-day working week. But not extra hours in that day. They cut a day off. And I think they got the same pay. Productivity went up 40%. 40%. Much more happy, more family life, more time, everything improved. Everything. So it's not like we have to work harder. In fact, if we work less, and there was another company in New Zealand last year did the same study.
Yeah.
It was a smaller company, and they did the same thing. They worked 4 days instead of 5, not extra hours, the same hours each day, same pay, productivity went up 25%, much more harmonious environment at work, much less employee turnover, much better, much more happy family life. Everything was improved. Everything.
The only difference of meditating with the eyes closed and in darkness completely is that you don't associate meditating with sleeping with anything else.
Also, this false sense of duality, because if you have the eyelids closed, you know that, so you still have this sense of in and out. Whereas if your eyes are open, even though you can't see anything, you know your eyes are open. So the false sense of duality will break down. So there will be an advantage to having the eyes open in a completely dark room versus closed for this purpose.
If during the meditation a feeling of well-being is coming, do we have to focus on the object or on the feeling?
No, keep on the object. In fact, on that point, in this Shamatha practice, there are 3 qualities of mind. The deeper we go into the practice, these become more and more manifest. And they are the qualities of clarity, non-conceptuality, and bliss. Clarity just means the mind becomes very clear. Non-conceptuality really here means that the mind becomes very still. And this bliss is not like this sort of agitated bliss, but it's what you're referring to, this sense of well-being, this inner joy, well-being. Now, each one of these 3 experiences, of course, is very nice. And all the meditation texts warn the meditator about these experiences because it's so easy to get caught up in these experiences when they happen and to go, wow, that's so nice, I want that. Have craving and attachment. And as soon as you do that, of course, it disappears. And then what people do is, I have to recreate that. So they try to recreate it with craving and attachment. Of course, that's impossible. And then they just get more and more frustrated. So rather than getting caught up in craving and attachment and a whole practice coming to a grinding halt, when these experiences start to appear in our meditation, use them to go deeper. Because each one of those experiences is a perfect opportunity to go deeper into the practice.
Is there any advantage to using any of the 3 objects that we've described other than just one that you find to be the easiest to hold?
Well, of course, the breath the big advantage for, in fact, in the 5th century, Asanga, one of the great Indian masters, in his text, he says, if discursive thinking dominates your mind, then focus on the breath. Then he says, no, the best object for you is the breath. And I think that accounts for just about everyone in the modern world. We're all caught up in obsessive, compulsive thinking all day long. And most of it's about the past and the future. And that just brings a lot of unhappiness. If we're focusing on the physical sensation of the breath, it gets us out of our blah, blah, blah mind into the body. And the sensations only happen in the present moment. So it gets us out of the past and the future into the present moment. That's why the breath is so good for many people. And relatively speaking, it's a little bit easier to focus on than many other objects. The mind, observing the mind, we saw the big advantage is we can become the masters of our mind instead of being the slaves of our mind. And the resting in awareness, one big advantage with that is that instead of having this tight, constricted mind, we can have this open, spacious stillness as our default mode in daily life. So each one has its own unique benefits, which are relevant to the modern world.
And what about when you then take that and move it into Vipassana?
Yeah, so again, if we are within a system of practice like Dzogchen or Mahamudra, where in Vipassana they mainly are investigating the mind, then what would be good as a shamatha precursor to that would be to use one of the shamatha practices of observing the mind or resting in awareness. If more like in the Geluk you're doing investigating the person, then the breath could be a good precursor for that.
I mean, a lot of writers and presidents and thinkers have said that right before you go into the state of sleep, you're in this state of subtle mind or where the creativity is really high. So the exercise that they used to do was hold a ball, iron ball, and then just rest. And the moment it drops, that's when they start writing or doing creative processes. Is that like a theta state? And we also get this music for theta state and so forth?
So, of course, what we're saying here is that where we are the most creative is if the more we can go down that threshold in the shamatha practice. So if we can do shamatha practice regardless of whether it's the breath, mind, awareness, and image, whatever it is, when our mind becomes more stable, more calm, more clear, that is the space of creativity. So what you will find is that as we go into the practice, and actually we'll do that now, we'll have a look at this chart, that's what's going to happen on page 24. So I'll answer your question in a minute, but let me do a few more points, it will come. So let's have a look at this chart now. So this is describing the stages of progress in the shamatha practice. So if we go right down the bottom here, we see the meditator, and in their left hand is a rope. So remember, that was the rope of mindfulness. So we're using mindfulness to hold the object, tying our mind with the rope of mindfulness to the object. In the meditator's right hand is a hook. That is this hook of introspection. So remember, introspection was quality control, monitoring the mindfulness. How are we going? Are we still on the object, or are we starting to become dull or distracted? And if we're starting to become dull or distracted, we hook the mind back to the object. The elephant is the mind. The fact that it is black is symbolizing dullness. The monkey is symbolizing discursive thought in general. The fact that it is black is symbolizing excitement, because that's the most common form of distraction. In fact, the most common form of distraction is that we are pulled away by pleasant things, the so-called sense pleasures. And that is, you can see in the middle of the diagram, a little bit above that you see a bowl of fruit, so that is taste. To the right of that we see a silk cloth, that is tactile, touch. Above that we have two round objects which are symbols, so that's sound. To the left of that we have a shell which has some perfume in it, so that is smell. And then diagonally above that we have a round object which is a mirror, that's visual. So these are the 5 sense objects that are the most common form of distraction. So therefore we often see excitement as listed instead of distraction. And what we see here at stage 1 of the practice is that the elephant and monkey are running wildly ahead of the meditator. Which means at the first stage of practice, what we notice is that our mind is completely out of control. That we sit down, and let's say we're using the breath, we focus on the breath for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then off we go on our story. And then maybe some minutes later we go, hang on, I'm supposed to be on the breath, come back for another 2 or 3 seconds, and then off we go again. And then often what happens is people who have this experience, then they go, I can't meditate, I just can't meditate. In fact, I must be doing something wrong because my mind is now completely out of control. Before I started meditating, it was sort of okay, but now it's gone crazy. And then people, often in a group situation, open their eyes and look around and everyone's super still. I'm the only one who can't meditate. I'm hopeless. So if this is your experience, very good. You can meditate. You're making progress. No, really, you are making progress. Because the first sign of progress in this practice is simply noticing how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. If we've never sat down to focus on a single object like the breath, we may live in the illusion that my mind is sort of okay. You know, focusing on the breath, well, that can't be too hard. I might get a bit distracted, but it can't be too difficult. And then when we realise that our mind is completely chaotic, then that is actually the first sign of progress. So we've made it to step 1. Very good. You can meditate. Keep up the good work. And then if we go around the corner, we practice more, we'll go around to the second stage here. And what we see here is that the elephant and monkey are not running so fast anymore. And they have a little bit of white on the top of their head. And that white is symbolising a little bit of stability and clarity. So by stage 2 of the practice, what we notice is there are some periods in our meditation, our mind calms down a bit, and we can focus on the object a little bit longer, maybe even up to a minute or 2. But then we still get distracted, and we get distracted for long periods of time still. So even at stage 2, we are more off the object than on the object. But if we keep practicing, we'll go round to the 3rd and 4th stage, and this road here, this 3rd straight road, is called the road of mindfulness. Because now our mindfulness is getting a lot better. So we see that it's really tied to the elephant of the mind now. So at stage 3, now we can focus on the object for maybe 5 or 10 minutes at a time. And now if we get distracted, we quickly recognise that and quickly come back. And that is symbolised by the elephant turning the head backwards, meaning we're quickly returning to the object. But now at stage 3, what we see, the rabbit has come into the picture on the back of the elephant. The rabbit is symbolising subtle dullness. And from stage 3, we need to pick this up, because if we don't, we'll get stuck here. Because by stage 3, we're focusing not too pretty well on the object. We're focusing quite well. 5 or 10 minutes, if we get distracted, we quickly come back. So we may think, oh well, I think I'm pretty close to Shamatha already. So even though mindfulness is getting a lot better, we've still got a lot of work to do on the quality of our attention. Particularly the fact that our mind is not very sharp or clear. It's sinking a bit. So we need to notice that sinking, and that is the rabbit. Because if we don't notice that, we'll just get stuck there. But then if we keep practicing, we'll get to stage 4. And at stage 4, now we can hold the object the entire session without ever completely losing it. But still, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of quality of our holding, of our attention. As a beginner, what you may have noticed is that, you're focusing on the breath, and somehow at the same time you're thinking about what's coming for breakfast. Even to the point where we're mainly thinking about breakfast, and a little bit in the corner of the mind we're noticing the breath. That can even happen at stage 4. Stage 4 means we never completely lose the breath, the object. But we have a lot of this fragmented. We think we can focus on 2 things simultaneously, but technically that's impossible. What's actually happening is in a very short period of time, we're jumping backwards and forwards between 2 objects, which means our attention is completely fragmented. So what we're doing then over these middling stages is we're improving that fragmentation, less and less fragmentation. And so that's what we see on around the corner on stage 5 and 6. It's called the road of introspection. Now you see the hook of introspection is more prominent. So what we are doing in stage 5 and 6 over these middling stages, we are fine-tuning the focus. Meaning if we're getting a little bit agitated, we relax. If we're getting a bit dull, we sharpen. The analogy often given here is like a guitar string. If a guitar string is too tight or too loose, it doesn't play well. If our mind is too tight or too loose, it doesn't focus well. So we are constantly fine-tuning the focus better and better and better. And then also, in the middling stages here, the question from before is, over on the left side you see a monkey in a tree holding some fruit. It says number 19. If we go over the next page and look at number 19, it says, since virtuous thoughts are an interruption at the time of shamatha meditation, it is necessary to stop them. At other times it is not necessary. So what this is saying is that once we get into these middling stages and our mind becomes more stable and more clear, what's happening is that threshold is going down in the mind and we're opening up the space for creativity. So what you're going to find more and more, the deeper you go into the practice, all these fantastic ideas will just start popping up in meditation. And what this is saying is that's not the right time to entertain these ideas. If they come up, then just go, great idea, I'll attend to that after the meditation. If you're worried about forgetting it, you can even have a little notepad, jot down a few keywords and go back to the meditation. And then attend to those great ideas after the meditation.
So you can stop the meditation and go back?
Well, because if you're worried about forgetting it, you're just going to get caught up in, I'm going to forget. If that's the case, then just jot down, in 10 seconds, 2 keywords and then go back. If we keep practicing, we'll get round to the next straight road, and this is really the road of enthusiasm. We're completely enthusiastic about the practice. So what we see here, if we go back down to the bottom, we see there's a flame on the side of the path. And as we go up, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until about stage 7 it completely disappears. The flame is the amount of effort we need to hold the object and to monitor that. Because now, as a beginner, our mindfulness and introspection are not well developed. We have to put a lot of effort to do that. But by stage 7, our mindfulness and introspection is now very well developed, and so it becomes automatic, spontaneous. We don't have to put effort. And what we see here at stage 7, the rabbit is gone. We're saying goodbye to the monkey. There's hardly any black on the back of the elephant. So by stage 7, now, if any little hint of subtle agitation or subtle dullness arises, immediately dispelled. And then at stage 8, we see now that the monkey's completely gone, no black on the elephant. By stage 8, all we need to do is just have a little bit of effort to go into the meditation, and then it's effortless. And here we can meditate, no problem, 2 to 3 hours flawlessly, without any subtle hint of subtle agitation or dullness. Keep practicing, we'll go to stage 9. Stage 9, it becomes completely spontaneous now. We can move in and out of meditation effortlessly, and there's not much difference between meditation and daily life, and we can stay in this flawless meditative state for at least 4 hours at a time. But still, we haven't achieved shamatha. Shamatha is the diagram in the middle at the top, and here we see the meditator flying through the sky and riding on the elephant of the mind. This is symbolizing what's called physical and mental pliancy. That as we do this as a beginner, our mind and body are not very flexible or pliant. We have a lot of aches and pains in the body, and we have a lot of resistance in our mind to doing the practice. When we achieve shamatha, then we don't have any, our body and mind become completely pliant. And to describe this process of how we get from stage 9 to shamatha, I'd like to read again from Alan Wallace's book, because he describes it very well. And this is on page 155. He says, following the realization of the 9th stage of attentional balance, you are primed to achieve shamatha. The 9 preceding stages entail many incremental changes, but the actual accomplishment of shamatha involves a radical transition in your body and mind. You will be like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. This shift is characterized by specific experiences that take place within a discrete, relatively brief period of time. According to accounts from the Indo-Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, the first sign of the achievement of shamatha is the experience of a sense of heaviness and numbness on the top of the head. This allegedly happens to anyone who experiences this transition, regardless of the specific method followed. It is said to feel as if a palm were being placed on the top of your head. It is not unpleasant or harmful, just unusual. Something remarkable must be taking place in the cortical region of your brain at this point. But so far, no one has monitored the brain correlates of this shift using magnetic resonance imaging or an electroencephalograph. This physical sensation on the top of the head is symptomatic of a shift in your nervous system or network of vital energies that is correlated with gaining freedom from mental dysfunction, a general state of mental imbalance characterized by stiffness, rigidity, and unwieldiness. Consequently, you achieve a state of mental pliancy in which your mind is fit and supple like never before. From a contemplative perspective, when the mind is dysfunctional or prone to laxity and excitation, it is hard to generate enthusiasm for healing the afflictions of your mind or for devoting yourself to virtuous mental activity. Once you are free of such mental dysfunction, you can focus your mind without resistance on any meaningful object or task. And such a mind is now set to be fit or serviceable. This is the key to achieving optimal mental performance. That's symbolized by the meditative riding on the elephant of the mind, meaning we can turn our mind to whatever we want without any resistance whatsoever.
From which book is this?
Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace. Following this sense of pressure on the top of your head, you experience the movement of vital energies moving in your body. And when they have coursed everywhere throughout your body, you feel as if you are filled with the power of this dynamic energy. You are now freed of physical dysfunction, so your body feels buoyant and light like never before. And that's symbolized by the person flying through the sky. It's said that when we achieve shamatha, our body feels light like cotton. Both your body and mind are now imbued with an exceptional degree of pliancy, which makes them remarkably fit for engaging in all kinds of mental training and other meaningful activities. When physical pliancy initially arises, the vital energies catalyze an extraordinary sense of physical bliss, which then triggers an equally exceptional experience of mental bliss. This rush of physical and mental rapture is transient, which is a good thing, for it so captivates the attention you can do little else except enjoy it. Gradually it subsides and you are freed from the turbulence caused by this intense joy. Your attention settles down in perfect stability and clarity. You have now achieved shamatha. Sounds pretty good. One diagram more at the top here. So at the top here now, we see the meditator on the elephant in the mind, and their right hand is a sword. This is a sword of wisdom. So this last diagram is talking about vipassana practice. That now, on the basis of shamatha, we can effectively engage in vipassana practice. And there are two numbers here, 32 and 33. So if we look over on the side here, the next page, it says, the root of samsara is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana observing emptiness. Equipped with mindfulness and introspection, seek the correct view of emptiness. So what this doesn't mean is that first we need to achieve shamatha before we begin our vipassana practice. What it does mean is that if we don't put any effort into shamatha practice, then vipassana practice is not really going to bring us anywhere. And really, if we really want to move along the path, then we need to unify these two practices of shamatha and vipassana. So that is very quickly this 9 stages to shamatha. Any questions about this before we slowly wrap up?
Can you repeat the distractions of the mind, like the mirror for the visual? And
Yeah, so the mirror is visual, And then we go below that, there's 2 round objects, which are symbols, so that's sound. To the left of that, we have a shell with some perfume in, so that's smell. Below that, we have a bowl of fruit, so that's taste. To the right of that, we have a silk cloth, is touch or tactile. Is touch, tactile, sensation, body.
You said like the mind can do 2 things, like thinking about breakfast.
We can't.
That's what I wanted to ask. Do you think it's possible to multitask?
No, actually multitasking is counterproductive. It's really not helpful at all. It just exhausts us because our attention is fragmented, completely fragmented. So multitasking, and studies show that it's counterproductive.
So when we think that we're actually focusing on 2 things, we're wrong.
We're wrong because what's happening is in a short period of time we're going backwards and forwards many times, which means we're not actually giving good attention to anything. And it just exhausts us. What you'll find is if you do the Shamatha practice, you can be fully present with whatever you're doing, and if you need to shift your attention to another task, you can do that. But now what we do is we're just doing this. And it exhausts us, and it's not productive at all.
Isn't music an exception to that though? Like when you're listening to music, certain kinds of music, while you're trying to focus on a task, it helps you.
But that's just like with the breath practice. A short-term strategy is if we're doing the breath practice and we're completely distracted and our attention is completely fragmented, we can introduce counting the breath so that we reduce the fragmentation. So similarly listening to music. But I think anyone who's highly focused, music, they wouldn't even hear because they're so focused. Music could help us to reduce fragmentation by thinking about all sorts of things, but it's never going to be a long-term solution to any focus. It can help to relax us a little bit. Again, short-term, sure, it could help, but it's not going to be an effective long-term strategy.
In Sufism, do they use it as?
I have no idea about Sufism.
I had a one-time experience lasting for...
One-time experience?
Yeah, lasting for probably several days.
Right.
It's like the time slows down.
Sure.
And
yeah, that's clarity. Like, for example, and we know this, sometimes some of us have this experience where something life-threatening happens and we have to be fully present. But then it's like everything's going in slow motion. You know, your whole life flashes past you in like a second. That's what's... See, in clarity, there are 2 types of clarity we develop. There's what's called temporal clarity and qualitative clarity. So qualitative clarity is, we've talked about the threshold. There's a lot of stuff going on down there we don't notice. When our mind becomes more clear, that will go down. So that's qualitative clarity, meaning we're going to start to directly see this subtle mental activity. But also, temporal clarity, this is what you're talking about, is that now, for us to notice something, it has to appear for so many milliseconds. And then we notice it. And studies have shown this. Meditators who've really developed this practice, the amount of milliseconds they need before they notice something is much less. And therefore, because of that, we can have this experience that things are moving slowly because we can attend to smaller units of time. So this is clarity.
My specific experience was I was driving in a highway and it's 80 miles per hour. And just in those several days, everything was clear.
Because
everything surrounding was very clear to me.
Exactly.
And I was chatting.
Because you had to pay very close attention at that speed because things happen fast. If you don't, you crash and die. So again, it's often when people have these very intense experiences where their life is threatened or potentially threatened, that they can have this cut through, and that can stay with us for some time, and then slowly it'll of course wear off. Okay, we need to stop there. We've run over time. So just a few things to mention now before we take a break. So of course that is the end of the teaching part of this course. So the next 2 days, the next 2 days are meditation days. First off, of course, with Felipe this afternoon at 5:30, you're going to do another impermanence meditation and also reflecting on this idea of refuge. And then this evening, this stillness in motion practice that we did this morning, and also then reflecting on precious human life. So that's this evening. Tomorrow morning before breakfast, this Shamatha practice, again this stillness in motion practice, to do that a little bit more. And then for the next 2 days, we're going to have meditation days. So for those, the morning and evening will be the same with Felipe. And then I'll be leading 3 meditation sessions between breakfast and lunch each day. And then Felipe will be doing the afternoon sessions. And you see the, I won't go through the schedule, it's on the board and you will be a gong. But so because this is no teaching, no discussion group, means we can be completely silent for the next 2 days. So it's a wonderful opportunity to really go within ourselves, to be 100% silent for 2 days. And then you'll find you'll get really the most out of these 2 days, and it's not uncommon then to gain a lot of insights into our life and so forth. And of course, if we start talking, we're going to dissipate that and we'll spoil it for the people around us. So really maintain that silence well for the next 2 days, and you'll get so much more out of these next 2 days. So in the morning before breakfast, 6:45, the normal sort of Shamatha session with Felipe. 3 sessions in between breakfast, lunch, 9, 10:05, 11:10, I'll be doing meditations. Lunch as per normal. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, depending on the weather, if the weather holds, the plan is to do a little walk. Felipe will lead the walk. And the plan is that over the side of the mountain over here, in the forest, there's meditators' huts, long-term meditators. They've been maybe meditating there for many years. And there's also a big stupa over there. So the plan tomorrow, again, if the weather holds and it doesn't rain, at 2 o'clock to go for a walk over there. You don't have to go up any hills, it's flat. It's just around the side of the mountain. It's about 25-30 minute walk. Spend a bit of time over there, come back. Then afternoon tea, and then another 2 meditation sessions before dinner. If it's raining tomorrow, then there'll be a video in here at 2 o'clock, a video about the Dalai Lama, a very nice video. And then again, the main normal session in the evening with Felipe. And then the second day, the same sort of schedule. In the afternoon of the second day, with Felipe, meditation at 2 and so forth, a couple of meditations. And then at 5 o'clock, you'll have a Dharma video here and the teacher that you'll see is Tenzin Palmo. She's maybe some of you here, she was teaching here not so long ago, last week or so. She's an English nun who has a nunnery down here, not far away. She spent many years meditating in a cave up in the hills here. And it's a very nice video, so you'll see that at 5 o'clock tomorrow. And then again an evening session with Felipe. And then the last morning of this course, last meditation with Felipe before breakfast. After breakfast at 9 o'clock, there'll be the last wrap-up session with me, where I'll talk a little bit about how to integrate some of these things into daily life and some general advice as well. And then after that, Kumpen will give a sort of a wrap-up talk, Tishita wrap-up talk in terms of what other sort of things are available, other places that you can go for other courses and so forth. So that's, and then finish at 12 o'clock for a picnic lunch on the last day. So that's the program. So let's break there, take a break. Come back 5:30 and I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.